of you know the Apostle Paul. You've heard of the Apostle Paul. He was a great Christian. He was probably one of the most radical conversions of people who was really against Jesus. He was against the church, did some awful things to the early Christians. And Jesus got a hold of him, drove him to his knees, right? Put him on the ground, blinded him, to say to him, hey, you've got this wrong. It's me that you're persecuting. And that's a pretty stark reminder. That's a pretty rugged message for us today, because Paul, I doubt there's ever been a human that was as faithful in studying God's Word, that was as true to what he understood to be God's ways, to be as committed to God's people as he was. He was really committed. He called himself the Pharisee of Pharisees, Jew of the Jews. In other words, that was his way of saying, man, I'm the best of the best in terms of being who God's called us to be. And yet he totally missed Jesus. He totally misunderstood who Jesus was, didn't get it at all. And it's a stark message, because when I think about that, I think, man, if a guy like Paul could have missed the truth, I better be careful. Now, I know Jesus, and you know I know Jesus, and I love Jesus, and I try to follow Jesus. But it doesn't mean that I'm not vulnerable, I'm not susceptible to missing some of the truth. Right? Mm-hmm. And if you allow me, if I'm susceptible to that, my guess is you're susceptible to that. Right? So it challenges me that we need to be really diligent about making sure we're not missing the truth. And I can't do that by myself, because I miss some of the truth. Sometimes I miss the truth more often, at least I think. Maybe I don't miss the truth, but I miss some of the things of the truth that are important. Maybe the way the truth is lived out. And sometimes I get caught up in stuff that is maybe not really important, or not the most important. In church language, we sometimes talk about our faith and the disagreements that believers have, one to the other. And we say, well, there's essentials, the stuff you gotta believe, no matter who you are, no matter what church you go to. But then there's also the non-essentials, stuff that we may feel like is important, but it isn't really essential to our faith. We can still be a Christian even if we don't believe that or we argue over it.
Is that called holistic?
It can be legalistic.
Holistic.
Holistic.
Is that a holistic choice, or is that even the word for that?
That's a good question, Tyler. That's a good question. Holistic, my understanding of holistic is to mean in kind of the overall, the whole. The whole of something, and we typically speak of holistic in terms of good terms. It's holistically good, or care for somebody holistically. We care for the whole person. Okay. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
And so in that sense, you could say, to have the holistic truth would be the truth that is good, or the holistic beliefs would be the beliefs that are good for all of us. And then you got some other things that may be good for some of us, but maybe they're not helpful to others. Maybe there are things that are preferences that I think are good, but they don't necessarily have any meaning to Joe. I'm just using that as an example, So we're going to talk about one of those stories this morning, because Paul wrote a lot of letters. You know that. He wrote letters because he started some churches and he helped start other churches. One of the churches was in the Greek city of Corinth, and he wrote at least 2 letters to them. We know it as 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. And I'd like you to open up your Bible this morning to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul may have written other letters. If you don't know where Corinthians is, it's really toward the back. It's like a good bit toward the back.
9:16 from my book.
In your Bible, yeah. Let's see, it'd be, if you find Acts or Romans, it's behind that. But it's right after Romans. And you got 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. We're in 1 Corinthians this morning, chapter 10. Oh, there you go, where your thumb is. All right, 1 Corinthians, flip over to the big numbers, chapter 10. And then the little numbers, the verses, we're going to look for verse, got it? 10? Yep. All right, we're looking for verse 23. 10:23.
Amen.
You got it?
Yes, sir.
Good deal. All right. So we're going to go from chapter 10, verse 23 to chapter 11, verse 1. Let me tell you why we're doing that. That's a little weird. You'd say, well, how come you're crossing over into one verse the next chapter? But the Bible was written before there were any chapters and verses. When it was originally written, there were no chapters and verses. Later on, as printed word got more popular and people started having books and whatever, then they decided, oh, we probably need to put chapters and verses in there. And that's what happened with the Bible. And in some ways, obviously, some really smart people felt like what's in chapter 10 belonged in chapter 10, and what's in chapter 11 belonged in chapter 11. But sometimes, after years of studying, you begin to realize, oh, well, maybe it's not quite in the right place, or maybe there's just an important verse in the next chapter that we ought to consider. In this, verses 23, chapter 10, verse 23 through 11:1 are all about one thing. And so they belong together when we're studying. So that's what we're going to do this morning. I'm going to just read it. And what I want you to realize is that it's talking about something that's weird to us today, okay? We don't do sacrifices anymore. At least I'm hoping we don't do sacrifices. I didn't see a lot of heads nodding.
Depends on the sacrifice.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. That's true. That's true. Now, what I mean by that is that once upon a time, we, the people of God, sacrificed animals for our sins, right? And
specifically lamb.
yeah, lambs and sheep, goats, a lot of things. Well, lamb is sheep, but so there were different things sacrificed. And when Christ came, when Jesus came, and he began to start the church, and he opened it up to say that Gentiles, those non-Jewish people, were now welcomed in, because Jesus was the sacrifice for all people. He was the one full, holistic, total sacrifice. No other sacrifice needed, right? Not only for God's people, the Jews, but also for all those who were not men, for those who would believe. All right, that's important to know in the story, because as the early church got started, some of the Jews that had become Christian, as well as some of the Jews that had not become Christian, were still insisting anybody new to the people of God had to keep doing sacrifices. In addition to that, there was a practice that let's say I was a priest and I sacrificed, and then I took whatever meat was left over from that sacrifice and I sold it at the store up here. And Terry went and bought some of that meat to eat, because it was in the store where she goes to shop. The rule was you couldn't do that, because that was tainted meat. That meat had been sacrificed to an idol. Okay? I should have said that, not me as a Christian priest. But there were sacrifices to other gods. And if I had sacrificed that meat, part of it, to an idol, and then I stuck the rest of it in a store and they sold it and Terry bought it, well, she was eating meat that was sacrificed to another god, an idol, and that was prohibited. So Paul is writing to say, hey, look, that's not really the case anymore. Everything is permissible. You can eat anything, even if it was offered to an idol, as long as you're not currently offering it to an idol. If some of the meat was left over and it's been sold, it doesn't have any meaning to you if you don't worship that idol. It's just meat, and it's available. I'm telling you that because that's kind of what this little story's about. But it's about a lot more, and that's what we're going to focus on. But I want you to understand when you're reading it, that's what it's about. Paul is trying to say, hey, don't get caught up in something that's no longer important. But he's also saying something else. It's not important to you, to me, if we're not worshiping that idol. But it may be important to somebody who's just new to the faith and they don't know that it's okay to eat that meat yet. So in that case, if it would offend them, maybe you shouldn't eat it because you don't want to trip them up. Okay, that's kind of a real overview summary of what this is about. But I want to read it and I want you to listen to it in this way. Listen to hear what God might be saying to us, the church, today, about things that we hold as essential to the faith that maybe aren't really essential. Those of you who've been Christians for a while, maybe you can follow that a little bit better. All right, we'll read it and talk a little bit more about it. So Paul says, he's quoting a saying that the new Christians believed that they were free to do anything now. And he says, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive, or in other words, not everything is useful for building up good things. Okay? No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever's put before you without raising questions of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom being judged by another conscience? If I take part in a meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. Follow my example, as I follow the example of Christ. Now that's pretty confusing. I mean, I've studied this over and over and over, and it's still, I read that and I think, well, okay, I got to do, what is, what is he saying? So that's why I kind of gave you the summary to start with. And I want to go back through it and say that just kind of quickly. What he's saying is that the Christians had heard the teaching. Now that Jesus has been the sacrifice once and for all, you don't have to do sacrifices anymore. If you believe Jesus was sacrificed for your sin, all of it, and my sin, then I don't have to do any more sacrifices, and you don't have to do more sacrifices. So I'm free. I'm free from that, and I'm free from some of the old ways that people were taught they had to live. But just because I'm free and I can do anything, it doesn't mean that doing everything is good. Some stuff's still not good. Not because I can't, but I probably just shouldn't.
Like drinking 4 cups of coffee in the morning.
Like drinking 4 cups of coffee in the morning.
This is one.
Yeah. And I want us to talk about that a minute. I want you to think about some things, particularly in church or with regard to Christians. Are there things that we Christians get caught up in today that probably aren't really essential, necessary to be a Christian? Let me give you an example. It's an old one, but everybody's familiar with it that's been in church. You remember when all churches used to sing hymns?
Mm-hmm.
And then that kind of got old for some, and so then we started doing contemporary music.
Yeah, they got rid of the red book.
They got rid of the red book, right. And we started singing like we did this morning. Some of the old Christians that just were all about the hymns, man, they didn't like this new music, right? And they said, "Oh, you're not being faithful anymore."
Singing.
That's right. But not everybody believed that. And then some people who got caught up in all the contemporary singing looked down on those who sang hymns and thought, "Man, you're out of touch. You're out of date. You're old news. This is ridiculous. You don't even have any faith anymore. You're just doing something we used to do just because we used to do it."
No, they're being judgmental.
That's right. And in either case, both sides were wrong, right? Both sides were wrong because the truth is, to be a Christian, you don't have to sing a certain kind of music.
You don't have to sing at all.
You don't have to sing at all.
You can praise quietly,
That's right.
whatever. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Okay, now, what Paul's also saying, though, is let's say I'm a hymn singer. I'm one of those that believes that contemporary music I'm not real sure about. I'm not sure that's even Christian. And Terry is all into the new music. I know, that's why I picked Terry. Terry's all into the new music. And Terry comes over and she sees me singing hymns and she thinks, "Oh, good grief, man, he is old school. This no longer applies. It's got no meaning." What Paul was saying to Terry is, "Hey, you know what? I get that you like the contemporary music and I'm cool with that. Because Jesus thinks that as long as you're singing to Him, you're praising God, it's good. No matter what kind of music it is." But Reed doesn't know that yet. Reed still thinks that it's all about the hymns. So if Terry goes to worship with Reed and she's criticizing him for it, it may cause me to kind of question what I'm doing. If she's all in my face about it, "You can't do that anymore, nobody listens to that stuff anymore, you forget it." Or flip it on the other way around. I, as a hymn singer, go to Terry and say, "I can't believe you're singing this stuff. You can hear this on radio. I didn't worship music." And Terry says, but I'm singing to the Lord. "I don't care what you say. That is, are you hearing that music? That's the tunes they sing in bars. What's wrong with you?" And Terry starts to wonder, maybe I'm not being faithful. Do you see how I've hurt Terry? Jesus says, no, don't be doing that. That is not helpful.
You confuse your faith. You
confuse what's really important, the essentials, with stuff that maybe is important to me, but it isn't essential to being a Christian. And you've messed up Terry. You've caused her to stumble in her faith. You, Reed, are the problem, not Terry. That's what Paul's saying here. This all stuff about the sacrifice of meat is confusing, so I'm putting it in contemporary terms where we can get it. That make sense?
Sure.
AKA contemporary music.
Yeah. Now, Paul's also saying, look, there's nothing wrong with me still sticking with hymns. That's okay. But don't put it on her when that's not an essential.
It's not her fault.
And in fact, he goes farther to say, in fact, I should be helping Terry. Let's just pretend that as an old Christian and a hymn singer and a contemporary singer and a newer Christian, she's newer and maybe not as strong in her faith. Obviously, I'm making this up, but just play along with it. And so if I'm insistent on this, I'm not helping Terry grow in her faith. She's now caught up in something, worrying over something. It's not really important. Paul is saying here, hey, when you're around Terry, maybe you really ought to consider what's best for helping Terry grow in her faith. Maybe you ought to remember, Reed, that your hymns may be important to you, but if they're not helping Terry grow in the faith, maybe you need to set aside your hymn singing and join in to help Terry grow. You get it?
Mm-hmm.
What's most important here? It isn't allegiance. It isn't loyalty to a certain kind of hymns or songs. It's trying to help people find Jesus and get to be closer to Him. That's what's important. Now, are there other things we, the church, do? Anything else you can think of?
Stick to a program
Yeah.
that things have to do A, B, C.
Yep.
Always
You
get
can
moved,
go
you know.
A, B, D, G.
Yep. Yep. Here's another straightforward one. My dad, man, I've been preaching in jeans for a long time. Uh-huh. Yeah. The dress, what we wear to church, right?
Yep.
Oh my goodness. I just talked about this a couple of weeks ago of saying, hey, there's not all bad to dress up to come to church. Sometimes we can go too far the other way and we forget that we're coming to worship an awesome God who we really need to respect.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm not dressing to respect him, then it doesn't make any difference what I'm wearing. I can be just as disrespectful to God in a suit as I can be in shorts and flip-flops. And I can be just as disrespectful to God in shorts and flip-flops as a guy in a suit. I want you to think about these things today because I think there may be some other ways in which we get caught up in stuff that may be important to us. I'm not saying it's bad, but it may not be helpful in building somebody else up in their faith. It may not contribute to them growing in their faith.
I had that exact experience at a former church. I was sitting, I was basically wearing what I've got on, okay, same type of thing. And this woman comes in a very, very nice dressed, I mean, she was to the nines, okay. And behind her comes a couple of girls in cutoffs, tank tops, and flip-flops. And my first impression was, what is going on? Don't these kids know? And then I got literally hit upside the head. They're here. They're here to listen. They're here to learn. Leave them alone.
Yeah.
Their clothes don't, as long as they're clean and neat, that's the bottom line.
That's right. That was your standard.
Yes, ma'am, sir, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
As long as
I
they're
get
clean
it.
and covered, that's what counts.
I get it. And you know, there could be other reasons why. I mean, if you know, my dad's mom, my grandmother, told my dad, they didn't have a lot of money growing up, but she told him, we're going to worship the King. That's what they used to call Jesus in that church. We're going to worship the King. You may not have great clothes, and you don't have to wear great clothes, but you go in that closet and you find the best that you got, and you wear that, because you're going to see the most important person ever. Respect him. Okay, I get that. That makes sense to me.
My father used to have my grandmother. Used to have a saying, he said, when you go to court, you wear your best
Yeah, there you
in
go.
front of the judge.
Yep,
So when you go to church, you wear your best for the Lord
that's it.
because you go to worship the King.
That's exactly right.
He
Yeah,
used to have that.
sure.
So,
Now, how is that important for us? Well, let's say we got somebody that comes walking in shorts and flip-flops. And we think, oh man, you're really going to stick out here. Well, maybe we need to change in our opinion.
Maybe we should have came with flip-flops.
Maybe that's all they have. Maybe we need to help them out.
They're here.
They're here. That's good. Let's do what we can to build them up, not tear them down. That's what this is about. And the reason I had made that whole deal about the verses being included is because I was praying really hard last night. God, I know how important it is that I teach on discipleship. But I also know I've been teaching on that, and I'm probably not doing the best job, and I'm probably boring some of the people there. Help me today to have a message that helps people understand why it's important that we become more faithful disciples. What does that mean? What does it look like? What are the things we ought to think about? Because there are people out there that desperately need to see real Jesus followers, people who know Jesus and are trying to live like Jesus, which means they're trying to help other people find Jesus. And they're willing to do pretty much whatever to help them find Jesus. How do I help them? And at 1:04, the Lord woke me up this morning. Actually, it was a little bit before that, but it was about 1:04 before I was awake enough to figure out that I was supposed to be awake. I'd slept a little over 3 hours. And I was clear, because what I kept hearing in my mind was, I couldn't even remember who said it. I mean, I'm telling you, I was out of it. But I had in my mind, imitate me as I imitate Jesus. Follow me as I follow Jesus. So I grabbed my phone and I Googled it. Oh, that was Paul that said that. That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. So I started reading. I got up, started reading, started studying. That's when I learned some of what I've shared with you this morning. It's important for you and me to be following Jesus the best we can, to learn as much about him as we can, and to live according to his teachings the best we can. Right? Why?
Not only it's good for ourselves, it helps us grow within the Lord.
Yeah. Helps us grow in the Lord. Why else is it important?
Others witness, see.
Yeah.
Helps other people, and like you said, grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I can teach it all day long. They want to see me walking it, right? They want to see me living it out. It's basic. And yet we all still need to do it.
Practice what you preach.
More than what we have been, right? Yeah.
It's like with our own parents. They teach us. They said, this is how you're supposed to behave. This is the way to be a good citizen. This is the way to be a good person. But if we don't see that in our parents, there's no example.
That's right. Talk is cheap.
Talk is cheap. And there's a saying, it's usually, I learned it in Spanish, but in English says, your actions talk louder than your words.
You got it. You got it. That's right.
Yeah, that's been my life lesson lately.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of my troubles have been getting into. It was like I'd get to where trying to impress somebody and I'd say something and not even be able to measure up to the bar.
Yeah, I got you. Yep, I hear you.
Instead of trying to impress them, I should be trying to do that for myself.
Yeah.
That's where my mistake was.
And
Thank God.
for Jesus. Yeah.
And I believe that many people have done that. They have talked and they have a measure to the bar. So when you live by example through Jesus, it's another level. You know, that we have to live by the standard. We have to live by the bar.
Yeah.
That we have to, because
That
the
Jesus
Bible said,
teaches.
exactly,
Yes.
because the Bible said, she said, be imitators of me.
Yeah.
Imitate me.
Imitate me.
So,
Jesus. Yeah.
Jesus. So I want to imitate him. I want to raise that bar up there.
Yep.
It's difficult,
Yeah.
but it's not impossible.
Right.
It's a walk.
It is. And it's a whole lot easier to walk that walk for me if not only God's helping me, but if you're helping me.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really important.
It's just a team stand still together.
Say that again.
The dream is only real if the team stands still together.
That's good.
That means you move together.
Yeah. That's good, Todd. Well, thanks for listening this morning. I hope this was a helpful message to you. It's certainly been helpful to me so far
It was brilliant.
in a long day. Well, it's from God. So it is.
It better be.
So it better, yeah, right. It's from God, it's not from me. Hey, can we close this part in prayer?
Before we do,
Not ending the
Okay.
service yet,
Okay.
just closing this part in prayer.
okay.